OS X is a series of Unix-based graphical interface operating systems developed and marketed by Apple Inc. It is designed to run on Macintosh computers, having been pre-installed on all Macs since 2002. OS X is the fourth most popular general-purpose OS within the market of desktop, laptop and home computers, and by web usage. OS X is the second most widely used desktop OS after Windows. OS X was the successor to Mac OS 9, released in 1999, the final release of the classic Mac OS, which had been Apple's primary operating system since 1984. The first version released was Mac OS X Server 1.0 in 1999, a desktop version. Mac OS X v10.0 Cheetah followed on March 24, 2001. All consumer releases of OS X up to 2013 were named after big cats. For example, OS X v10.8 was referred to as Mountain Lion. However, with the announcement of OS X Mavericks in June 2013, this was dropped in favor of Californian landmarks. OS X, whose X is the Roman numeral for 10 and is a prominent part of its brand identity, is built on technologies developed at Next between the second half of the 1980s and Apple's purchase of the company in late 1996. The X is also used to emphasize the relatedness between OS X and Unix. Unix 03 certification has been achieved for versions 10.5 for Intel CPUs, and versions 10.6 through 10.11. iOS, the mobile OS for the iPhone, iPod Touch, iPad, and the second and third generation Apple TV, shares the Unix-based core and many frameworks with OS X. An unnamed variant of v10.4 powers the first-generation Apple TV. Apple also formally issued a separate line of editions for server use. The first releases of Mac OS X from 1999 to 2006 can run only on the PowerPC-based Macs of the period. After Apple announced it would shift to using Intel x86 CPUs from 2006 onwards, Tiger and Leopard were released in versions for Intel and PowerPC processors. Snow Leopard is the first version released only for Intel Macs. Since the release of Mac OS by 10.7, Lion, OS X has dropped support for 32-bit Intel processors as well. It now runs exclusively on 64-bit Intel CPUs. The latest version of OS X is 10.11 El Capitan, which was released to the public on September 30, 2015. History. The heritage of what would become OS X had originated at Next, a company founded by Steve Jobs following his departure from Apple in 1985. There, the Unix-like Next Step operating system was developed, and then launched in 1989. The kernel of Next Step is based upon the Mac kernel, which was originally developed at Carnegie Mellon University, with additional kernel layers and low-level user space code derived from select parts of BSD. Its graphical user interface was built on top of an object-oriented GUI toolkit using the Objective-C programming language. Throughout the early 1990s, Apple had tried to create a next-generation OS through the Taligent, Copland and Gershwin projects. Although these were eventually abandoned, this led Apple to purchase Next in 1996, allowing Next Step, then called OpenStep, to serve as the basis for Apple's next-generation OS. This purchase also led to Steve Jobs returning to Apple as first an interim and then the permanent CEO, shepherding the transformation of the programmer-friendly OpenStep into a system that would be adopted by Apple's primary market of home users and creative professionals. The project was first code-named Rhapsody, and then officially named Mac OS X. The first version of Mac OS X, Mac OS X Server 1X, was a transitional product, featuring an interface resembling Mac OS. It was not compatible with software designed for the original Mac OS. Consumer releases of Mac OS X included more backward compatibility. Mac OS applications could be rewritten to run natively via the Carbon API. Many could also be run directly through the classic environment, with a reduction in performance. The consumer version of Mac OS X was launched in 2001. Reviews were variable, with extensive praise for its sophisticated, glossy Aqua interface but criticizing it for sluggish performance. With Apple's popularity at a low, the makers of several classic Mac applications such as FrameMaker and PageMaker declined to develop new versions of their software for OS X. Ars Technica columnist John Siracusa, who reviewed every major OS X release up to 10.10, described the early releases in retrospect as dog-slow, feature-poor, and Aqua as unbearably slow and a huge resource hog. Apple rapidly developed several new releases of OS X. Syracuse's review of version 10.3, Panther, noted, "It's strange to have gone from years of uncertainty and vaporware to a steady annual supply of major new operating system releases." Version 10.4, Tiger, reportedly shocked executives at Microsoft by offering a number of features, such as fast file searching and improved graphics processing, that Microsoft had spent several years struggling to add to Windows with acceptable performance. In 2006, the first Intel Macs release used a specialized version of 10.4, Tiger. In 2007, 10.5, Leopard was the first to run on both PowerPC and Intel Macs with the use of universal binaries. 10.6, Snow Leopard was the first version of OS X to drop support for PowerPC Macs. As the operating system evolved, it moved away from the legacy Mac OS, with applications being added and removed. Targeting the consumer and media markets, Apple emphasized its new digital lifestyle applications such as the iLife suite, integrated home entertainment through the Front Row Media Center and the Safari web browser. It also began selling third-party applications through the Mac App Store. New OS X versions also included modifications to the general interface, moving away from the striped gloss and transparency of the initial versions. Some applications began to use a brush metal appearance, or non-pinstripe title bar appearance in version 10.4. In Leopard, Apple announced a unification of the interface, with a standardized gray gradient window style. A key development for OS X was the announcement and release of the iPhone from 2007 onwards. While Apple's previous iPod mobile devices used a minimal operating system, the iPhone used an operating system based on OS X, which would later be called iPhone OS, and then iOS. The simultaneous release of two operating systems based on the same frameworks placed tension on Apple, which cited the iPhone as forcing it to delay OS X Leopard. However, after Apple opened the iPhone to third-party developers, its commercial success drew attention to OS X, with many iPhone software developers showing interest in Mac development. In two succeeding versions, Lion and Mountain Lion, Apple moved some applications to a highly skeuomorphic style of design inspired by contemporary versions of iOS. At the same time, simplifying some elements by making controls such as scroll bars fade in when needed. This direction was, like brushed metal interfaces, unpopular with some users, although it continued a trend of greater animation and variety in the interface previously seen in design aspects such as the Time Machine Backup utility, which presented past file versions against a swirling nebula, and the glossy translucent dock of Leopard and Snow Leopard. In addition, with Lion, Apple ceased to release separate server versions of OS X, selling server tools as a separate downloadable application. A review described the trend in OS X server as becoming cheaper and simpler, shifting its focus from large businesses to small ones. Apple removed the head of OS X development, Scott Forstall, in 2012, and switched designs towards a more minimal direction. Apple's new user interface design, using deep color saturation, text-only buttons and a minimal, flat interface, was debuted in iOS 7 in 2013, with OS X engineers reportedly diverted to working on iOS 7, the version of OS X released in 2013. Mavericks was something of a transitional release, with some of the skeuomorphic design of iOS removed, but the general interface of OS X largely unchanged. The next version, Yosemite, adopted a design similar to iOS 7, but with greater complexity suitable for an interface controlled with a mouse. From 2012 onwards, OS X shifted to an annual release schedule similar to that of iOS, after releases generally coming every second year in the 10.3–10.7 period. It also steadily cut the cost of updates from Snow Leopard onwards, before removing upgrade fees altogether from 2013 onwards. Some journalists and third-party software developers have suggested that this decision, while allowing more rapid feature release, meant less opportunity to focus on stability, with no version of OS X recommendable for users requiring stability and performance above new features. Apple's 2015 update, El Capitan, was announced to focus specifically on stability and performance improvements. In 2012, with the release of OS by 10.8, the Mac prefix was officially dropped in all references to the operating system name within its website. Description: OS X is the 10th major version of Apple's operating system for Macintosh computers. Previous Macintosh operating systems were named using Arabic numerals, e.g., Mac OS 8 and Mac OS 9. The letter X in OS X's name refers to the number 10, a Roman numeral. It is therefore correctly pronounced 10, TN, in this context. However, a common mispronunciation is XKs. OS X's core is a POSIX-compliant operating system built on top of the XNU kernel, with standard Unix facilities available from the command line interface. Apple has released this family of software as a free and open-source operating system named Darwin. On top of Darwin, Apple layered a number of components, including the Aqua interface and the Finder, to complete the GUI-based operating system, which is OS X. OS X introduced a number of new capabilities to provide a more stable and reliable platform than its predecessor, Mac OS 9. For example, preemptive multitasking and memory protection improved the system's ability to run multiple applications simultaneously without them interrupting or corrupting each other. Many aspects of OS X's architecture are derived from OpenStep, which was designed to be portable, to ease the transition from one platform to another. For example, NextStep was ported from the original 68K-based Next workstations to x86 and other architectures before Next was purchased by Apple, and OpenStep was later ported to the PowerPC architecture as part of the Rhapsody project. The most visible change was the Aqua theme. The use of soft edges, translucent colors, and pinstripes, similar to the hardware design of the first iMacs, brought more texture and color to the user interface when compared to what OS 9 in OS X Server 1.0's Platinum appearance had offered. According to John Siracusa, an editor of Ars Technica, the introduction of Aqua and its departure from the then-conventional look hit like a ton of bricks. Bruce Tognazzini said that the Aqua interface in Mac OS X v10.0 represented a step backwards in usability compared with the original Mac OS interface. Third-party developers started producing skins for customizable applications and other operating systems which mimicked the Aqua appearance. To some extent, Apple has used the successful transition to this new design as leverage, at various times threatening legal action against people who make or distribute software with an interface the company says is derived from its copyrighted design. Since 2012, Apple has sold many of its Mac models with high-resolution Retina displays, and OS X and its APUs have extensive support for resolution-independent development on supporting high-resolution displays. Reviewers have described Apple's support for the technology as superior to that on Windows. The architecture of OS X incorporates a layered design. The layered frameworks aid rapid development of applications by providing existing code for common tasks. OS X includes its own software development tools, most prominently an integrated development environment called Xcode. Xcode provides interfaces to compilers that support several programming languages including C, C++, Objective-C, and Swift. For the Apple-Intel transition, it was modified so that developers could build their applications as a universal binary, which provides compatibility with both the Intel-based and PowerPC-based Macintosh lines. First- and third-party applications can be controlled programmatically using the Apple Script framework, retained from classic macOS, or using the newer Automata application. The Darwin Subsystem in Mac OS X is in charge of managing the file system, which includes the Unix permissions layer. In 2003 and 2005, two Macworld editors expressed criticism of the permission scheme. Ted Landau called misconfigured permissions the most common frustration in Mac OS X, while Rob Griffiths suggested that some users may even have to reset permissions every day, a process which can take up to 15 minutes. More recently, another Macworld editor, Dan Frakes, called the procedure of repairing permissions vastly overused. He argues that OS X typically handles permissions properly without user interference, and resetting permissions should just be tried when problems emerge. Applications may be installed by the user from any source, or from the Mac App Store, a marketplace of software maintained by Apple. All App Store applications run within a sandbox, restricting their ability to communicate with other programs or modify the core operating system. This provides increased user security but restricts the features they can offer. Apple produces OS X applications, some of which are included in SIM sold separately. This includes eWork, Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro, iLife, and the database application FileMaker. With a move to online-only software distribution, Apple has moved most of the iLife and eWork applications to being freely available with lifetime updates on buying a new Mac, and shifted software sales for most applications to the Mac App Store rather than through physical media distribution and languages. As of September 2011, OS X is the second most active general-purpose client operating system in use on the World Wide Web, with an 8.45% usage share according to statistics compiled by W3 Counter. It is the most successful Unix-like desktop operating system on the web, estimated at over 5 times the usage of Linux. There are 22 system languages available for the user at the moment of installation. As of Mac OS X Lion, the languages are Arabic, Chinese, Czech, Danish, Dutch, English, Finnish, French, German, Hebrew, Hungarian, Italian, Japanese, Korean, Norwegian, Polish, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, Swedish and Turkish. Input methods for typing in dozens of scripts can be chosen independently of the system language.